Okay, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a really interesting pile of sources. We've got news clips, a bit of a policy document, some online comments, all kind of circling around this really complex topic of immigration in the US. And our goal here, our mission, is basically to sift through all this material and pull out the key insights, the important bits. Think of it like a shortcut,
Yeah.
helping you understand the different takes and arguments floating around, at least based on what's in these specific sources we have.
Exactly. We're here to sort of walk you through it. We'll point out what these different pieces are saying, maybe why it matters, and give some context. But, and this is important, only using information from the sources themselves.
Hmm.
We're not adding our own opinions or outside facts. We're really just reporting on what's in this stack of material you've shared. No taking sides on, potentially controversial stuff found in there.
Right, strictly sticking to the script, so to speak. Okay, let's jump in. First up, let's look at how immigration gets talked about, how it plays out in the media. We've got some news clips here.
Yeah, and what you notice straight away is, wow, the intensity and the very different ways the whole thing is framed. One source gives us a peek into this pretty fiery panel discussion on CNN's Newsnight. It was focused on Trump's policies, I think, and a specific deportation case involving a Salvadoran migrant, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The source says the discussion basically went off the rails, devolved into chaos, even personal attacks flying around.
And this is where it gets particularly interesting, I thought. That same CNN report flagged a moment where the View host, Anna Navarro, apparently made a comparison between illegal immigration and slavery.
Oof. Yeah.
Yeah, and that, as you can imagine, got a really strong pushback from Sir Michael Singleton, a CNN contributor. The source describes their back and forth, and Singleton's comment really emphasizing his identity. I think it was, last time I checked, I'm black, you're not.
Right.
It just shows how fast these TV debates can turn personal and, yeah, really contentious.
Definitely. So that's one flavor of media coverage. But then, if you look at another source we have, a Fox News transcript,
Hmm.
well, it's a totally different picture. Here you have former Border Patrol Chief Mark Morgan weighing in. He's quoted suggesting that any talk of a manufactured border crisis, and he apparently attributes that phrase to Senator Chuck Schumer, is just misleading the public.
And that Fox News source, the analysis there goes even further. It actually puts forward this idea that for Democrats, a porous border isn't seen as a problem. It's, quote, a solution.
A solution? How so?
Well, the source claims it provides low-wage workers for donors and also compliant voters for the party. That's the argument presented there.
Hmm.
It even gets into this debate about whether calling it a border crisis is like an objective fact or just someone's opinion, referencing Brit Hume on that point.
Interesting. And that same source, the Fox one, it also touches on how Democrats reacted to the idea of a border wall. It mentions some analysis from Ashley Allison, a Democratic strategist, apparently reacting to Kamala Harris's stance in a CNN interview. And it brings up the specific point where Harris supposedly called the wall $5 billion that would be wasted. Because, the argument went, it would only stop maybe a third of illegal immigration.
Right, but then the source offers a counter-argument, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests, well, maybe the opposition isn't about the money. Maybe it's a fear that the wall might actually work.
So just from those couple of clips, you see these incredibly stark contrasts, right?
Yeah.
Different narratives, different claims about motives, really heated exchanges sometimes. It's not just about the facts, it's about the whole story being told.
Absolutely. Polar opposites in framing. And all this media heat, it's happening, against the backdrop of actual laws and policies. So to give us some of that foundation, we've got this excerpt about the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965.
Okay, the legal side. What's the main takeaway from that source?
Well, the big thing, according to this document, is that the 1965 Act fundamentally changed U.S. immigration. The most crucial part, it got rid of the old national origin quota system. That system had been around for decades, heavily favoring certain European countries.
Ah, right. So it abolished that. What did it replace it with?
It shifted to a preference system. Now, this particular source doesn't give us all the nitty-gritty details of the preferences,
Okay.
but it does clearly spell out who wasn't subject to the main numerical limits anymore.
And who was that? Who got exempted?
Two main groups highlighted here. First, immediate relatives of U.S. citizens. And the source defines that as spouses, unmarried minor children, and parents. But only if the sponsoring U.S. citizen is 21 or older.
Got it. Spouses, kids, and parents of adult citizens. That sounds like a pretty significant group.
It is. And then there's the second group, special immigrants, also exempt from the limits. The source lists some specific categories here, like former U.S. citizens wanting to return, ministers of religion and their families, certain long-term U.S. government employees working abroad.
Okay, specific cases.
Yeah, and even some specific situations involving children under 14 who are technically immediate relatives, but maybe lost their parents or were abandoned.
Yeah.
So quite detailed definitions.
And did the source mention anything about workers? Because that comes up a lot in the media debates.
It did. It touches on the foreign worker certification process set up by the Act. Basically, it says the Department of Labor could certify employers to bring in foreign workers, but the employer had to demonstrate they couldn't find qualified American workers willing and able to do the job for the prevailing wage in that area.
So a requirement to check the domestic labor market first.
Exactly. So, while the source might nod to older history, like the Chinese Exclusion Act or whatever, the really key stuff from this document is that big 1965 shift away from quotas and these specific legal definitions. It created immediate relatives, special immigrants, the worker certification rules.
It's quite a contrast, isn't it? You have these detailed legal categories in the Act, and then you have the much broader, often way more emotional language we hear in the media clips we just talked about.
Precisely. The legal framework is complex, nuanced. The public debate, as reflected in those clips, often seems less so.
So how does all this, the media framing, the policy details, how does it connect to what people are actually saying, thinking, maybe worrying about? Let's bring in that online commentary thread and another source piece.
Okay. Yeah, that online commentary is quite a mix of opinions, as you'd expect. You see someone, for example, talking about living in a country where anti-immigrant feelings are rising, and they mention the kind of risks non-citizens face, both systemic and just local prejudice.
And there's quite a bit in there trying to draw a line between legal and illegal immigration.
Right, definitely. One comment specifically makes the point that many Republicans, they argue, actually support legal immigration, maybe even want more of it. Their opposition, this commenter suggests, is focused squarely on illegal immigration.
Which is a distinction, like you said about the law, that sometimes gets blurred in the bigger, louder media arguments.
For sure. And then another part of the commentary gets into worries about the future for immigrants' children or descendants.
Yeah.
Someone questions if there's really a clear pathway anymore, from arriving to becoming a, quote, happy and prosperous citizen in today's job market.
Raising the possibility that they might end up, what was the phrase?
Part of a swollen class of unhappy, poor people. Pretty bleak outlook expressed there.
Yeah. And that same commenter kind of ties immigrant success, or at least public acceptance, to certain characteristics, like being educated, speaking English, maybe filling specific job. Needs, the source mentions computer programming or medicine as examples. Sort of conditional acceptance.
It's looking at perceived factors for integration, yeah.
Yeah.
But then countering some of the assumptions you might get from, say, the political framing sources. We have this other piece, the PMC excerpt.
Ah, yes. What did that add?
It makes a very specific factual point that many immigrants, and this includes undocumented immigrants, do pay U.S. taxes. And says there's research backing this up. That's a detail that often gets lost, I think.
Definitely. A concrete piece of data cutting against a common narrative. Okay, and finally, let's circle back to a specific policy idea that popped up in both the Fox News source and the online comments.
Right, the issue of providing health care to undocumented immigrants.
The Fox source mentioned a plan in New York, didn't it? The mayor's plan.
Yeah, it cited a New York assemblyman stating the plan aimed to cover 600,000 people. And that number included 300,000 identified in the source as illegals.
Okay, so a specific policy proposal being reported on. And how did the online commentary connect to that?
Well, the commentary brought in polling data. It cited a CNN poll suggesting something like 60% of voters were against that kind of plan. And the commenter used this to frame an argument about Democrats maybe misjudging public sentiment on ideas perceived by some as outlandish.
Comparing it, I think, to Trump's approach, which the commenter felt connected better even with controversial ideas.
Exactly. So it connects a specific policy debate directly to polling numbers and broader political strategy discussion. Shows how these things intersect.
Wow. Okay. So we've really covered some ground here, moving through these different sources. We saw the media landscape often intense, highly polarized, with very different political takes on the same event.
Then we dove into the legal bedrock, that 1965 Act, getting into the specifics of who qualifies under categories like immediate relative or special immigrant.
And then we explored that online commentary, seeing the range of public views, concerns about integration, the legal distinction, reactions to policies like healthcare.
Plus that key factual point from the PMC source about taxes.
Yeah. So quite a mix. from chaotic TV debates to dry legal definitions to personal online opinions.
It really highlights the different layers, doesn't it? The contrast between the formal structure of the law and the much messier reality of public and media discussion. We saw sources presenting completely opposing views on why things are happening and what the results might be.
So stepping back from the details for a second, what really stands out to you having walked through this specific collection of materials? What's the big picture feel?
Well, I think it really makes you consider how we process information on such a complicated and often emotionally charged topic like immigration. When you get these different streams, policy details here, fiery media takes there, personal anxieties or factual corrections somewhere else.
Mhm.
Sometimes they clash. Sometimes one seems to totally ignore the other. How does that whole mix actually influence our understanding? Does it clarify things or maybe just make it harder to feel like you have a solid grasp?
That's a great question to leave things on. For you listening, think about that. What does this kind of deep dive, pulling apart these very different types of sources, tell you about the challenge or maybe the necessity of navigating all these layers when you're trying to get properly informed on something this complex, something to chew on?